Hello, my name is Charles Shear. I'm the Vision Science Consultant for Burtech Corporation, and we're bringing you another in the series of videos on the clinical uses of the BVT instrument. Today we want to show you how to use the BVT to enhance vision and motor memory. There are many factors which contribute to problems with short-term memory. Of course, normal aging has an effect, but also concussion and traumatic brain injuries. The sequence mode of the BVT can be used to not only test that, but also in training. Like with all the things we do, we want to start with the patient's baseline. So we're going to start with a black background, green target, and we're going to use a large grid size. And let me talk a minute about grid size. In many things, when we make the grid size bigger, it makes it more difficult. But here, actually, when the grid size are small and everything's compact, it makes it harder. So when we get into pattern difficulties that have a lot more targets on there, and we spread those out over a bigger area, it's a lot less confusing. Let me demonstrate that to you by showing you several different grid sizes and pattern difficulties, and you can see what I mean. Here's an example of when the hard pattern is sent to the small grid size. And when they're that close, it gets pretty confusing. If I change that simply to a large grid size, you see how they're spread out. And this gives less opportunity for the locations to be confused. The other variable is display time. When we're set at 1 second, which is standard, if we have 5 targets up there, they only have to remember them for 5 seconds. On the other hand, if we have it set to 5 seconds, now they've got 25 seconds to remember. So quite simply put, by the time they get to the end of some of these sequences, they will have forgotten where the first one was with some of our patients, particularly right after a stroke or a concussion. So again, we want to extend that time when we can. But to start with, to establish a baseline, we want to set that at 1 second. So we're going to go back here and we're going to have a large grid size, a large target size, a large target sensitivity, display time of 1, and we want to set the pattern difficulty to medium. Then we're ready to create a baseline for this patient. Just like in the old Simon game, each time you get the sequence right, it adds another target until you miss. You can kind of follow along yourself on the computer screen and even touch the targets if you want. I'll be quiet here for a second. Normally during the baselining, we would be quiet, but as the training progresses, especially with athletes, you can talk to them, distract them, even have them do math problems. Any cognitive demand just makes it more real world. You see, after I miss, the targets pop up and show them the correct sequence. We want to always reinforce to the patient what would have been right. Once the subject has reached the goal you've set for them, which is usually 6 or 7 correct, then we're ready to make it more difficult. And we can do that by increasing the target difficulty or the display time. And let me show you how that works here. We'll keep the target at medium and show how as we increase the display time, it becomes more difficult. We're going to increase it from 1 second to 3 seconds. And notice how much longer it takes. And by the time you get to this sequence of 5, you almost forget where the first one is. And now we'll go to 5 seconds. And here again, it's going to be displaying 5 targets, just kind of simulating that for you. And as I said, it's almost painful to watch this. You actually want to try to help them, but it just gives them more opportunities to make errors, and it gets them stretching this out in very small increments. And again, we reinforce what the sequence would have been. Next, we'll go to add a sport or other static background depending on the subject's needs and interest. Here we happen to choose baseball. Next, we'll add a motion background. This one in particular with this task is a bit of a challenge because you've got colored lights popping up out towards them, and it's very distracting. And I won't let this run through the whole thing. I just wanted to demonstrate it for you because I want to get up to the vestibular stimulations. Because as everyone knows, when we add a vestibular OKN stimulating stripe, it has an effect on so many things. It can affect cognition. It also can affect short-term memory because we're doing more tasks. And this multitasking is just more difficult after a traumatic experience like stroke or concussion. My favorite targets are the concentric circles or optic flow targets. And again, you can see that we can slow those down. We can change the contrast. We can do many things to help the patient, start them slow and get more challenging as we go. We can change the targets. But it all is for the purpose of getting them back into a real world situation. And these optic flow targets help with that. It's like walking down a hallway. Then the next logical progression would be the background with the grocery store in it, or we would add, more cognitive tasks, distractions as we go along. Allow me to review 3 key points. First, we use this sequence mode to improve short-term visual and motor memory skills. Secondly, unlike other programs, the large grid size are easier than the small due to the crowding phenomenon that's caused by the smaller grid sizes. And third, the shorter the display time, the easier the task. The longer the display time, the harder. And that's because they simply have to remember it longer. Once again, we want to thank you for viewing this video, and I hope it has been helpful and somewhat educational for you. And please join us for more of these videos in the future.